Taylor's in the building.
Already the show goes on all night till the morning. We dream so long. Anybody ever wonder when they would see the sun? Just remember when you come to the show. What's up? Already the show goes on all night till the morning. We dream so long. Anybody ever wonder when they would see the sun? Just remember when you come to the show goes on. Have you ever had the feeling that you was being had? Don't that shit that make you mad? They treat you like a slave, put chains all on your soul and put whips up on your back. They be lying through they teeth, hope you slip up off your path. I don't switch up, I just laugh, put my kicks up on they desk, unaffected by...
Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of State of the Jungle with Malik, Wright, presented by First Star Logistics. I got a new little shtick I want to say for State of the Jungle. It's the longest running in-studio Bengals talk show dedicated to all things Cincinnati Bengals talk. I'm your host, Malik Wright, joined by my co-host as always. We've got Daniel Alameda. We've got Evan McPhillips. We're missing Logan, but we're still here. And yes, Landon Mancine, you've been with me for a long time, brother, man. He says, hashtag old intro song. So if anybody doesn't know, when I first started podcasting back in 2014, when I first joined the sports industry, the song I used was The Show Goes On. I reached out to Lupe Fiasco's people and I asked for permission to use the song because I remember I was so scared for the company I was working with at the time, Back Sports Page, for the opportunity to use that song. But yeah, that's the intro song that kind of got me to where I am. And it's a song that's very near and dear to me. So we decided to bring it back because, yeah, we plan on doing some really, really special things on the road to the Bengals' potential hopeful Super Bowl run next year. That being said, we got a jam-packed show, a lot of stuff we want to get into. We're going to introduce a new segment on the show, too, called Player Spotlight. Our Player Spotlight this week will be T. Higgins. But before we do, make sure you guys give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and turn on post notifications so you guys don't miss when we go live or upload content from the First Star Logistics studio. Let's keep it with T. Higgins, though. Let's start with our Player Spotlight. T. Higgins is slated to be a free agent unless the Bengals do the good old franchise tag. I want to do a player spotlight. I want to do a deep dive into his season, whether he met expectations, whether he fell short of those. I think we probably are all on the same wavelength, probably fell a little short of those. But just the positives, right? The pros, the cons to potentially bringing T. Higgins back for, another run at this thing. I'm really curious to hear what you guys have to say. So unlike your typical shows, usually I start off with a strong monologue and I have a lot of things that I want to say. It ain't that type of party today. Instead, I'm going to kick this over to Daniel, let him start us off. Daniel, you can bring in the new segment of the show, Player Spotlight T. Higgins. Let's go.
All right, I'm excited for this, and I'm going to start this off going off a little off script with T. Higgins. I know we're talking about just this year, but the thing with T. Higgins that really catches my eye, and, when we have this discussion, do you bring T. Higgins back or not? I had to go back and look at the playoff run that the Bengals had when they went to the Super Bowl. I went back and looked at it and was like, okay, how valuable is T. Higgins really to this team? And I looked at just how well he performed and even being in person at some of these games, in the First Star Suite, looking at T. Higgins' value when he's healthy, right? You've got a guy who is a jump ball threat, a guy who is a 50-50 ball guy. And it's not like it's kind of a cop-out in the sense of, hey, if nothing else is working on your offense, if the run game wasn't working, you could just throw the 50-50 ball to T. Higgins. And in the biggest game of his life, in the biggest moment, T. Higgins had one hell of a game in the Super Bowl. And I know I'm going back a couple years, but I'm looking at even in the playoffs last year. Last year he had a couple huge games. And the question with T. Higgins, is about the money, but him as a player, I truly believe he is a top 20 receiver in the National Football League when healthy. I truly believe that he could be a number one on some NFL teams. And when I look at what potential value could he be bringing to the Bengals in the near future, it's allowing, a guy like Jamar Chase to have more one-on-one opportunities. And it's allowing T. Higgins, he is going to be the guy that has those one-on-one opportunities. The focus will be on Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, I truly believe, is the wide receiver to exploit that. Because if it's not T. Higgins, you're going to rely on a potential free agent guy. You're going to rely on an Andre Yoshivas. You're going to rely on a Rome Odunze potentially if you go with that route in the first round. And T. Higgins just gives you consistency when he's on the field. So that's the main thing that I really have to say about T. Higgins is when he's healthy, when he's on the field, I truly believe his value is as a 50-50 ball guy, and he's just consistent when he's on the field and with Joe Burrow healthy. So that's what I like about T.
Yeah, I think the disappointing thing with T was obviously the health, right? And it's not his fault personally that he's injury prone necessarily, or has had more injuries than most. I guess I don't know if injury prone is necessarily the fair label yet, because sometimes there's just those kind of freak things that happen, like getting tackled so hard that your ribs break. Like if there's constant like soft tissue injuries, like constantly a groin, constantly a calf, constantly a hamstring, which I know he's had those a little bit this year. That's when it really worries me, and especially for extended periods of time, 4 or 5 weeks in, come back 3 or 4 weeks, and then suddenly you have it again. But just looking at like purely the performance on the field he had, he was still 9th out of 61 wide receivers in yards per reception, so he was still offering that downfield threat. He was 13th in yards after the catch per reception, which was a career high for him. So he was able to do that after the catch and help manufacture some yards that this offense definitely desperately needed when Joe Burrow was not healthy, when Jake Browning was still trying to get his footing in. You see a little bit of that inefficiency, right? That just stems not just from T. Higgins, who ranked 35th out of those 61 in yards per route run. The reason I think that we see those other numbers are so high while the efficiency on a per play basis is so low is because we know the struggles that the Bengals offense had through the first 5-6 weeks, right? Until they had those 2 or 3, the Jake Browning. And so I see the struggles of the Bengals offense as the reason that efficiency doesn't really match up with some of the other numbers that have been good. The other part of that obviously is being second in drop percentage, which when you look year to year at the receivers who generally have drop percentages spike, they usually come back down to the average, right? It's just like a quarterback who has a bunch of balls that gets intercepted, but then falls back to his career average, right, after 1 year, or just has a lot of his turnover-worthy plays intercepted. Looking at T. Higgins, his drop percentage in this season was 12.5%. He was at 4.5 the year prior, 8 the year prior, 6.9 the year prior. So, yeah, middle of the pack, but not like out there with 12%. That's almost double a lot of times what he was offering. So, and that was with 120, 140 or 136 targets. Like, that's a bigger sample than what you got from this year from an injured T. So, I think there's a lot of reasons to expect that a healthy T. Higgins would perform on field a lot better, as well as a healthy Joe Burrow would help him have more gaudy numbers that we're used to, right? But like Daniel said, you can't replace, like, when you need those balls, those 2nd and 7, just need a play, right? When you need to go for 3rd down and 12, and you need somebody who can just make a play. How many times have we just seen that out route or that corner route to T. Higgins with that back shoulder throw on the sideline? I mean, that's invaluable to have in the red zone, on the sideline in crunch time. It just, the money downs are so important. And T. Higgins is definitely one of those guys who's been there. And like you said, the catch percentage, like on contested catches, has been good to where he is a weapon that the Bengals don't have, right? You talk about having a variety of skill sets. Like, yes, Yoshi Boss, we hope can be that. But that's kind of hoping, and hope isn't really a plan, right? So you're going to need, like you said, to sign a veteran. And sure, if you want to pay an aging Mike Evans premium money that you don't want to pay T. Higgins, because Mike Evans is looking to get another paycheck, right? You're talking about, okay, like Kendrick Bourne, DJ Chark.
Yeah.
Those are the guys who you're going to be throwing back shoulders to instead. Like,
and they're still probably going to be making 8-10 million.
Right. And maybe even more than that. So, like, I don't know how comfortable we all feel with that, but like, that's the reality, is that you can just say, oh, we're going to draft a rookie. Oh, Yoshi Voss is going to step up. But like, that's a legitimate question mark until we see it on the field and what happens. So just obviously removed from the contract situation, we just evaluating what T did on the field. Like, when he was out there with a productive offense, he himself was productive and was a big reason in that too.
I agree. I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, because you guys know my feelings, right? Unfortunately, when I give my opinion on some of this stuff, I can't help but think about it from, obviously it takes 2 to tango. You have to think about it from the lens of T. Higgins. And when I say T. Higgins, I don't mean just T himself. I mean his agent.
Mhm. The people, the entities who represent T. Higgins.
The entities surrounding him.
T. Higgins' interests.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's just not as easy as, hey, we want you. Come to, you
want to be here. We want you. Yeah.
Right.
There's
not,
a price.
It's not that.
Right.
So here's what I found myself thinking for the long haul, at least as of recently. I found myself in a place of, if you're in the Bengals shoes, which is probably what the Bengals are going to do, because again, the Bengals overvalue their players. I know we say that all the time. The Bengals and Duke Tobin were right when they said we're not in the business of making other teams better. If you wanted to Higgins, go out and get your own. He said that last year at the combine. It's almost a year till he said that, right?
Right.
And here we are, and T. Higgins still doesn't have a deal. So I do believe he meant that statement when he said it. But even though he meant the statement when he said it, doesn't make it necessarily true in the long haul, right? And what I mean by that is, you could see a situation in which they franchise T. Higgins and they're expecting, with a healthy Joe Burrow, with Jamar Chase back in the fold, to go fully in on this Super Bowl run that they're planning for this year. And this year feels like a pivotal year in that, in that run. And I think, I'm approaching this season. I mean, every year you expect your team, if your team has a competitive team, a competitive quarterback, you're expecting your team to take the step forward and try to compete for a championship. But this year feels a little bit different. It feels like this is the last year where you'll have this crop potentially together. And if you're approaching it like the Bengals, I expect T. Higgins to be franchise tagged. I then expect them to probably, he walks the following season. And with that thinking, with that thought process, I think I've started to come around to the idea more of, of him staying in the fold here in Cincinnati, only because we know their thought process and how they
I think they value T. Higgins on this team this season for a
Yes.
Super Bowl run more than they'd value a second round pick in
Right.
their mind.
And yes, in the long-term situation, the long-term projection. And I think that when you're thinking about it that way, T. Higgins here for the Super Bowl run, I think the Bengals are probably approaching it. What's going to make our team the most lethal offensively that it could possibly be? The tight end position is definitely a position that you need to address, obviously. Hopefully in free agency,
Hopefully. Oh man, there's so many tight ends in free agency. I would love to have on the team after this year.
Yeah, like Noah Fant.
Any number of them.
Noah Fant
is
Give
one
me
of them,
some.
sure. Yeah.
So give me some. But my thought process is, I think that that's where the spotlighting for T. Higgins comes out, because I think we can all agree, and I think T can agree to this. T didn't have the season that he wanted to have.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for David Mulgeta, in Athletes First, and T. Higgins to approach a team and say, hey, we want top wide receiver money, when you didn't put up top wide receiver, numbers. I think that this franchise tag could be beneficial for both sides. Now, I could jump on a phone call in a week from now and speak to someone and say, hey, what's going on with T. Higgins? And they could say, hey, you know what? We're planning to sign him long term. We're going to give him his asking price. And this conversation could be null and void. I just don't think that's the smart decision. That is not something that I personally would recommend. And I am no expert, but I think that in this window that you have right now, you have to do everything in your power to maximize this championship run that you plan to go on. And I think that you have contracts that are coming up, such as the Jamar Chase. I don't even want to begin to think about what Jamar Chase is going to command.
Yeah.
We've talked about it already at just a preliminary basis. We've talked about how it would behoove the organization to sign Jamar Chase now.
Would not behoove Jamar Chase, but
It would not
be sure,
behoove, because I think Jamar
sure
Chase,
be cool if you did, Jamar.
It'd be so cool, Jamar Chase.
Sure
if
be
he
cool
did.
if you did.
And
But that number is going to start with a 3.
Oh my
I'm
God.
sorry.
Yeah, it's going to.
It's everybody just prepare yourself for that right now. That's
So when I look at it, I'm looking at it and I say, unfortunately, this is the fun part, but this is also the scary part, when you have a team that has great players and people want those great players, and those players, have never entered a free agency, so to speak, in their life before. This is the fun part. This is the part where you have to consider all options. And I think considering all options, you have to consider life with T. Higgins not on the Bengals, right? I think that's something we all, because I think we all were kind of sold the whole, oh, we want T's our guy, yada yada yada. But then you look forward a year from that, and he still has a no deal. So you have to start to read the tea leaves and start to figure out, is the deal going to get done before free agency? Is it going to happen? I don't know if I see that. So if you have to think about it from the long-term investment standpoint. And, my guy, Kevin, First Stars CEO, him and I we've been talking about this for a while now, man. We've been talking about the potential of T. Higgins not on this team and what that might look like. And at first I'm like, Kevin, come on, man. Like, the Bengals are going to bring back T. Higgins, because that's everything I was told. Even people from my sources who I was talking to in that building, oh, we want to bring T. Higgins back. But then as you get closer and closer and closer towards the new league year, man, you start to sort of decipher a lot of stuff.
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree for all the reasons you said, where I think the injury plague season that he had this year really set the table for them to be worlds apart in terms of the numbers they're looking for. Because like you said, obviously athletes first prides themselves on getting the guys the maximum amount of money possible out there. Right. And that's what they stake their reputation on. And it's going to be hard for anybody to come back and pay him top of the market money right now after the injured season, after being if he had came out and absolutely snapped this season and been healthy the whole time, then yeah, absolutely. Crazy. Right. Then he could justify it. And maybe the Bengals end up just saying, hey, we want to keep it together and pay it. But like, the Bengals aren't going to feel good about giving him the guaranteed money that he's going to want. Particularly, they can match the APY pretty easily, but like, it's always going to be the guaranteed money, because out of the 90 million, 100 million he's going to get, someone else might guarantee 60 million of it. The Bengals might guarantee 25.
But here's the thing, here's the one caveat people have to understand when it comes to Bengals contracts. And I think you understand this, Danny, you understand this. And I think that's because we cover the team and we deal in close proximity with the team. I don't think people understand the way the Bengals structure their contract. There's not many guarantees after that first year. They like to try out their guarantees into that first year. And I think that's what sort of makes them lose the battle for guys at times, because most teams like to guarantee that money over the course of year one, over year two, over year. Usually a lot of money is tied into it throughout the couple of years. It's smart from a business standpoint. It's smart for their perspective, and I think that's why you look at it and you say,
long term, it is smart.
But but you think about it. That's why the Bengals, you're like every year, oh wow, the Bengals have so much cap space to work with, because of how they tie their contracts together. Where you look at other teams, they're struggling. They're pinching pennies to pay guys, or pinching pennies. They have to restructure this contract or cut this guy or restructure that contract. The Bengals don't have to deal with that. And it's not because they're just so smart. It's because they just guarantee a lot of the money in that first year, whereas the other teams spread it over the course of the time. Now, that being said, a lot of players sign with those other teams because you're getting guaranteed money beyond just the first year. You're getting guaranteed money in the second year and the third year and the fourth year. And that's more interesting, enticing to their pockets, right? Like, I'll give you an example. The Bengals would never sign a player to the type of deal that the Bills signed Von Miller to. Even though there were a lot of void years on that contract, it was still a lot of guarantees as well in that contract. It's the reason why the Bills are probably kicking themselves right now, because they're like, crap, everything that we thought we were getting out of Von Miller didn't pay off. It was a gamble, right? It didn't pay off, but that's not an investment the Bengals would make, because the Bengals don't view that as a smart investment. Instead, hey, we'll pay you X amount of dollars. We'll tie all the guarantees into year one. And then after that, it might be a lower amount of guarantees too. But after that, it's going to be honestly just your salary.
And that's also where it is the double-edged sword, because that's the good part. And the bad part is when we have the discussions of, the Joe Mixon like last year, right? Everybody's saying, cut Joe Mixon, cut Joe Mixon.
It's not that simple, right?
The Bengals aren't going to do that. And that's where the double-edged sword comes in play. Sam Hubbard, same thing. You can look at it from a business perspective. On paper, what do the Bengals need? And in my opinion, the edge rush position is something huge. And on paper, you can say Sam Hubbard is a great run defender, but you can get that production elsewhere. The Bengals aren't going to cut Sam Hubbard. He is making what, $9, $10, $12 million. Financially, it would be smart, but like you said, the contracts wise, they guarantee up front.
You want to hear the crazy part about this whole thing?
Yeah.
Sam Hubbard, had he entered free agency, he would have got more money on the open market.
100%.
But here's the one caveat. Had he had the year that he had this year, he'd be prime candidate to be cut.
Mhm.
And that's the one thing. The Bengals, tongue in cheek, we won't.
And I
cut
do
ya.
want to play devil's advocate
Yeah.
here, or at least defend the Bengals
Sure.
stance, because I understand that they look and they say this is not held together like a house of cards that some teams are, right? Some teams are built, hey, in 1 or 2 years, a lot of stuff is coming off the books. The whole face is changing 100%. We're knocking it down and rebuilding it. Let's push everything we got right now, and we can take a year or two off. Obviously, with Joe Burrow, they're going more of like a Miami Heat culture approach, where they're going to come back every single year and say, we're going to compete. We're going to be a playoff contender. We're not going to take years off or ruin future years for the sake of trying to win now in that sense. And you look, what are the consequences of that, right? We talked about Darius Slade before he signed his contract, was going to be like a $15 million dead cap hit to be not on the team, right? And that's when you end up paying guys like Tom Brady. You pushed all your chips to the middle of the table because it was a short-term goal, but he counted for $81 million against the cap this year to not be on the team. So when you're dealing with a third of your cap is just gone for a year because you wanted to push everything into the table like that, or you structure contracts in a way that you end up paying for a guy in his age 34 season, like Keenan Allen, Khalil Mack, all these guys, $34 million for the cap that year. So now, again, we're back to, there goes a third of your cap to guys who are 34, 35 years old, Teron Armstead, like Xavier Howard, like these are the contracts that like look good for the first 2 years. And then you see the cap hit for the last 2-3 years. And especially when that's guaranteed, you're on the hook for it.
Right.
Like you don't have and so like, I understand the financial flexibility aspect for the Bengals.
sure.
If they don't want to pay guys to not be on the team, especially after they just had to do it with Trey Waynes.
And to answer your question, Jared, when was the last time the Bengals did not honor a contract, big or small? It is like every contract they issue is guaranteed. If I'm not mistaken, the last time I saw them not honor a contract, it may have been, it's two people. Giovanni Bernard, they cut him. He had another year left on his contract. He was cut. And then it was Preston Brown, I believe. Preston Brown was signed an extension when Zac Taylor first took over as the Bengals coach.
And it's fair to ask whether or not they applied any type of pressure to the Mixon restructure of like, hey, Dalvin Cook is out there and Austin Eckler is looking for a trade.
I'm sure.
And Ezekiel Elliott's out there, and there's a million, you know, and you're making the second highest cap hit this year. Can you just take a little bit less? Otherwise, our hands might be tied financially. Like, you know,
I mean, but
you have
also,
such a nice family. It'd be such a shame, you know, like that type of deal. It's
Right.
like,
especially with
not saying they were intimidating him or anything. I'm just saying, like, you know, that's
oh yeah,
that's
Lyle
the hardball business.
Lyle Collins was one as well.
Yeah.
Lyle Collins was one. I believe there was an either a void or an it was.
And these guys are lawyers, man. Like word of mouth does not matter to them. Verbal agreements do not matter to them. This is not the NBA where like players are like, hey, in a year I'm going to come out in free agency. I'm going to make this much for you, Daryl Morey, right? You know, like it's a lot more like I need the guarantees in writing. I need to know exactly what's going on. And these things are broken down by roster bonuses and how many practices you show up for to the day. Like these are done to like such a detailed degree with per game active bonuses and all this stuff that gets hashed out. Like these guys are over every single like every letter with a fine tooth comb. So like I just don't see that.
I agree with you, man. It's going to be interesting for sure. I think the player spotlight for T. Higgins is definitely interesting. I want you guys to comment down in the comment section who you guys want us to do a player spotlight on next week. Who should we discuss next week? Maybe you want Cam Taylor-Britt. Maybe you want somebody that's not on the team. The objective of this new segment is for people that are on the team, but maybe there's a person that you want us to spotlight about their potential of joining the Bengals. Who knows? Definitely looking forward to talking with you guys more about that and seeing what we can cook up. But I think the next portion we want to get to, before we do though, make sure you guys give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and turn on post notifications so you guys don't miss when we go live or upload content from the First Star Logistics studio. And I see we're already getting some great ones in the comment section already, and I appreciate that as well. I want to move the conversation on over to the Bengals draft. Bengals draft a little bit. I know I said I wouldn't stick on this too much, but you know, we don't know who necessarily is going to be sitting there at pick 18 because pick 18 is such a weird spot, obviously. And you genuinely don't know. You can kind of, you know, gauge a little bit who might be there towards you know, the day of maybe, or maybe even like a week out, you might be able to understand how the board might shape up, but you just never know. The draft is really a crapshoot as to what's going to be necessarily available. But I'll say this. I think that BPA for me is still a position where I'm looking squarely at. I
Mhm.
think that tying yourselves to one position group is a recipe for disaster. Although I know there is a lot of people out there that are like offensive line, draft to tackle. If the Bengals go that route, as an Alabama Crimson Tide fan, I'll just say this: I don't like people saying J.C. Latham. That's just me.
I'm glad to hear you say that
Uh,
because I'm in the same boat.
yeah,
I think he's fine, and I don't
yeah,
want fine from a
Yeah.
first round
right,
tackle.
right.
Right? You can get fine in the third round. Right? You can get fine in the second round. I
Mhm.
don't know if I'm taking a first round guy. I definitely want the higher upside guy. Like I want the guy who has the tools that you can only get in the first round. That's to me, like with what's going to be probably available to them, I definitely like Mims over Latham for that reason. That I'd rather take the chance on the tools, the inexperience, the clay that you have there to mold and put some good habits in and some good technique in, and that's more appealing to me than just kind of
Mhm.
settling, quote unquote, for Latham. And I'm not trying to slander him at all, but at the same time, like you and I are both sitting here as people who've watched him constantly, and we're just
I'm telling you guys right now, you
unimpressed on the
guys will be
hype.
pissed.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna call it like it is. You guys would be pissed. You guys would be like, why did we draft him? But I gotta touch on something for 1 second though. Oh, man. When you get past the first, the second, the third round, man, if there's a guys with first round pedigrees or second round pedigrees, you got to take a chance on them. I'm just being honest. You have to. And it's too far often. I feel like trying to be the smartest people in the room have screwed the Bengals over.
Mhm.
DeJuan Jones was sitting right there for you. I got to talk about this for 1 quick second. DeJuan Jones is a guy,
Can confirm.
he DeJuan Jones is a guy that I thought could have added value to your offensive line. He's a guy that I thought could have added value to your offensive line room. And the guy's massive, right? There was so many different draft stories that came out. And I'll tell you guys right now, you're going to hear so many weird draft stories like you do every single year at the combine. Oh, this guy doesn't love football. This guy wants to be, a reality television star. You'll hear so much crap on a regular basis. Like, to me, it's not, don't overthink it, man. Turn on the tape and just, turn on the tape, watch film on the guy. Sure, there are things that you'll uncover about players, right? But I think sometimes we overthink a lot of players when the draft process comes. Trust me, I do it all the time when I play Madden. It comes time for a draft guy, I pick the draft a guy, and I say, "Oh, let me try to find ways." I feel like teams try when we get around the draft process, teams try to find reasons not to draft a guy. They try to tear him down. They try to rip him to shreds. And you got to also understand sometimes those stories come out because teams want to see a player fall. Teams want to see, hey, maybe if this story comes out, a player will fall to me. Like everybody and their mother was like, oh, Jalen Carter, we don't know if we could draft that guy because of all the off the field stuff. And I promised you, had Jalen Carter fell to said team, he would have been drafted. There was no way with all the baggage. And that guy came in with a lot of baggage. I mean, a lot of baggage, right? It don't get much more serious than some of the baggage he came in with. And he still was drafted where he was drafted. We let him go to the Eagles, right? So, like, it's at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you want to make sure that you're getting a surefire thing, but is any prospect a surefire thing, right? Everybody comes in with something at the end of the day. If the tape says this guy could play and you think that you can work around some of the extra curricular stuff, then you work with it.
The guys with no concerns go in the top 5,
right.
top
Literally.
10, and
Literally.
sometimes not even that. Sometimes less.
Right. So, like, I think you have to take it with a grain of salt. Like, for instance, how many teams are out there probably kicking themselves when Laramie Tunsil's video of him smoking marijuana or whatever with the gas mask came out? And they're like, oh, we don't want that guy.
Egad.
Right. So, like, it's one of those things where it's like, I know I said a lot there, but I'm just saying, like, I said all to say that we don't want JC Latham. That's what I meant to say. JC Latham has
that was a
nothing to do-
long-winded way to say.
JC Latham has nothing to do with extracurricular stuff. But I hear me out, Bengals fans, from Alabama Crimson Tide fan, Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
We don't want him. We don't want him. You don't want him. You think Jonah was bad. Okay, I'll leave it there. Danny, what are your thoughts?
Just to add on to Latham, what I saw out of him, I saw he is a mauler in the run game, but the pass protection, especially as a rookie, you guys are not going to like it. For a team that is going for a Super Bowl run, to have JC Latham as because he would be your starting
basically the second most true dropbacks in the NFL behind the Chiefs. Yeah. And maybe this year I haven't even looked recently.
And you are relying on him, he wasn't a great pass protector. So I'm with you. I think JC Latham he's not a guy I'm definitely looking at. There's a lot of good talent, and that's where I've got to look deeper into like the top 10 of okay, what if this cornerback falls? But I'm looking at the defense tackle position.
I think the big thing, sorry to cut you off. I think the big thing here too is you want a pass protector in this ideally on this offensive line because what do the Bengals do primarily? Pass the ball. That's what they do, right? They don't. We yelled all season about how they don't know how to run the ball and they don't do it effectively, or maybe they don't do it consistently, right? Whatever the issue is, you definitely want a guy that can make sure you keep Joe Burrow upright. When we brought up about the JC Latham, that's just not a strong suit for him. Maybe he will go to another team. Maybe he will be a fine pro.
Maybe it'll be the Mike McGlinchey type where it's, hey, I'm going to be a good run blocker and I'm going to be capable enough on pass blocking to where I can hold my own and run the play action and do my thing.
I just think that the Bengals can't afford to take flyers on offensive linemen that have not shown that they can pass protect consistently.
Right.
That's an issue, right? That's an area that they definitely need to make sure. You want to get the most surefire prospect. There's no such thing as a surefire prospect. You want to get the closest thing to a surefire prospect in terms of his film and his ability to pass protect. That is what you're looking for on the offensive line. Just throwing it out there. Danny Patay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that's where a lot has to be said in free agency. We have to see where this team is. But when I looked at all these guys, number one, Jerzon Newton for me. I looked at this entire defense tackle class. For me, the only two defensive tackles I truly would consider here is Newton and Byron Murphy. And Byron Murphy, I'll get to in a second, but Jerzon Newton is a guy in the run game, in the pass game. He is just blowing guys up, whether it's one-on-one, over the center, in the gaps. He is a guy on the goal line you can rely on. And some people say, well, he has a smaller frame. On the goal line with quarterback sneaks, with running back powers, he is overwhelming offensive lineman. And that's something I want in a defensive lineman. And especially, like you said, round one, I need a guy who is going to be a stud. And Jerzon Newton has all the tools to be a stud in the future, but he's also doing it right now at an elite level. When I look at a guy like Byron Murphy is more of an explosive type. You know, he's the freakish athlete. And he's a guy where he's a great pass rusher. And he's a guy he can take on double teams in the run game, a little more undersized. But Byron Murphy is another guy where he's got the potential. For me, I take Newton over Murphy just because I think you can find more of Murphy's type later in the draft. A guy I love personally, Michael Hall out of Ohio State. He's one guy where I saw day one he would come in and he could compete for BJ Hill's spot day one. And I think nobody's even talking about him in the first round. People are barely talking about him in the tail end of round two. He's a great pass rusher. He dominated Notre Dame's offensive line, and we know how great Notre Dame's offensive line is. And we saw him go one-on-one against Joe Alt, widely regarded as the best defense or offensive tackle in this year's draft. He went one-on-one multiple times in the run game, in the pass game, made Joe Alt completely fall over. So I think it is Jerzon Newton. He is my number one defensive tackle. And then number two, I think Byron Murphy's good and he's got tools to be elite. But if Newton's there, he is a guy I'm confident I'm slamming, take Newton, and he could be a potential star in the future. So,
yeah. I want to get to some questions too, man. I saw somebody asked about, and we're gonna touch more about this. So keep this topic up, but I just want to address this really quickly because we are talking about offensive line. Somebody said Illuminor with Guyton would be perfect, and somebody also asked thoughts on Jermaine Illuminor to the Bengals. Can I address this for one quick second? I unfortunately watched a lot of Raiders games this year, and I know people get excited about players and about coming here, and it's fun, right? It's fun anytime your team's able to go out there and grab a player. I saw that Raiders offensive line struggle several times this year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Jermaine, he's not bad. He's all right, but I don't think he's so much of an upgrade over Jonah Williams, in my opinion. I saw that Raiders offensive line. Offensive line get absolutely manhandled by Khalil Mack. I believe Khalil Mack was lined up on somebody's side quite often that game. And I think that's the game Khalil Mack had, what, 6 sacks?
Yeah, it was 6. It was with Aiden O'Connell.
Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, right? So for me, I don't get too excited about I don't get too excited about adding a Jermaine Illuminor to the Bengals offensive line, especially if you're talking about getting an upgrade. That's just my thought process. Anybody have anything else that they want to add about Jermaine Illuminor?
Yeah, I think and obviously people are going to talk about it because of what he said on social media. I already see a ton of articles written about, Lincoln Bengals to Jermaine Illuminor. That's fine. Like Illuminor is probably out there, pushing for his own job, saying, hey, I would like to play with the Bengals. And if it gets to the point where it's Jonah Williams isn't on the roster and you need to figure out another offensive tackle to be on your roster, I mean, you got to look at the rest of this free agency class. It isn't elite. So I'm with you. I don't think for sure it's not an upgrade over Jonah Williams. 1,000%.
I mean, Khalil Mack literally, and Khalil Mack really, he's still a fine edge rusher, I would say.
Yeah.
Right? But
very good.
He absolutely abused Illuminor quite often. And in our division where you have to play guys like TJ Watt twice a year, Myles Garrett twice a year. I'm sorry. It just doesn't do too much for me.
And that's the hard part about this conversation, because we could all say, like, I'm of the belief, like, where are you going to spend your money? If they go and sign a T. Higgins, then maybe you're sitting there looking at Illuminor, and that's the boat that they're putting themselves in, right? And that's what they've got to figure out, is what is more valuable and what is more replaceable. In my opinion, I would rather have an offense tackle.
JC Kirk says he's not great by any means, but he gives value and depth. Oh, yeah. I think from a value depth perspective, sure, that's fine. But I think people are legitimately talking about him being a starter at the right
stopgap starter. Yeah, a starter if you need to. If you don't get one that you feel comfortable with day one starting in the draft, that's what that is.
Right.
That's what a Michael Onwenu is, a depth guy. Like,
now, do you think he can play right tackle?
Michael Onwenu?
Yeah. You see, what scares me is his frame, his size.
He's played right tackle.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
I know
he's played right tackle, and he has done it capably. But long term, no.
Yeah.
Long term, no. I think he's your emergency break in case of emergency right tackle. And then if you can feel comfortable about that day one, then maybe you kind of talk about kicking him inside, having him be your swing guy for whatever injury is very likely coming because of their health that they've had on the offensive line for going on 2 years now. Yes. So it's like
somebody said Trent Brown is better than DJ USA says at right tackle. Trent Brown is better than all these dudes. LOL, and he's cheap. I agree. I think he is better than a lot of these guys. However, there has been motivation concerns with Trent Brown and his love for the game at that point. This is the guy that they had to put a weight clause in his contract where he had to stay under a certain amount of weight in order to get him in playing shape. So that's just, it's tough. You're paying a guy millions of dollars and you have to find a way to keep him motivated. That's a tough sell for me. However, if Trent Brown was in his primal state, then sure, I would love to have a guy like Trent Brown, because I do think Trent Brown is a better right tackle than Jonah Williams was, and I would consider him as an upgrade. And I just don't know how many. Maybe you're able to get a guy like Trent Brown for cheap too, because how many other places where is he going to be able to sign? How many places did he rub off the wrong way in the league when he had that stint with the Raiders where things didn't go correctly? Right.
And then even the Patriots, he did not have a good stint with the Patriots, and that's where I don't know what necessarily would be his value. I don't know, what the people are projecting him at, but I know that Trent Williams he's not coming off the high of his career right now.
Well, that might mesh with what the Bengals are looking for, where it's, hey, if you walk in here and you're serious about it and you take the starting job, you can have it. Like, we will give it to you.
Right.
We'll pay you $8 million a year and give you the chance to get that spot and take that over and give us the faith in you. And if not, then you can back up or you can play, swing around a little bit, but I think it might mesh well with what he wants for getting the money and getting the chance, and them also taking the chance on a guy. You might get discounted like you did with Lyle Collins when you got discounted with him for the injury. Now, it didn't work out that time, but these are the swings that championship teams take, right? Where you're not afraid to spend $5, $6, $7 million on a potential piece that's really going to help you in the long run for winning that championship.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Are we all out on Deontay Smith? Just want to throw it out there. He's a guy that when the Bengals drafted him, we had hopes for. We liked his length. We said, hey, could he get some more weight on him? If he gets some more weight on him, maybe there's potential at the right tackle position. He has the ideal, size that you want as a starting tackle in the National Football League. do we see anything there? Is there anything there at all?
Not holding out much hope.
I think, yeah, I just remember really watching him in the preseason this past offseason. I think if you sign a guy like Illuminor, then this whole offseason is the point of, hey, Deontay, this is your last shot here. This is your last shot, not to be the starter, but like I liked what I saw out of him in the preseason as a backup. So
Guys, I just want to address something.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about this. That's part of the state of the jungle. We're going to do a deep dive. We're not going to just talk about the players on the surface that you can go on any Bengals show and hear people talking about. If you don't like the conversation, then you don't have to listen to it. But we're going to discuss it regardless because he is still a member on this team. And if we're still holding out hope for guys like Joseph Asai who haven't shown jack shit, to be honest with you, in 3 years, we can talk about a guy like Deontay Smith as well on the offensive line, especially when you're going to have a gaping hole at the right tackle position. So finish, Daniel.
Yeah, and I think that's very important that you said that because the fact of the matter is there's 53 men that start the season on the roster, and those same 53 men do not finish the season on the roster. It is 17 games, and every single team deals with injuries. And come playoffs, we're going to be having the conversation of that backup right tackle, that backup wide receiver, that backup cornerback being thrust into a starter role against the Kansas City Chiefs. And then we'll be having these discussions. So it is important, and that's why they are focusing on the depth. So, yeah, I think Deontay deserves a chance, and I think he deserves a chance to be on the roster. I'm just curious to see what they do with Jones.
The fact that they signed Cody Ford tells me all I need to know about what the faith is really with Deontay.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, man.
And when injuries happen and when people went down, it was Cody Ford who got the call, right?
You're right, 100%.
So that kind of spells the writing on the wall for me.
For Deontay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can get my. I mean, I get that.
All I can do is interpret what I see, and that's that the signing of Cody Ford, giving him the run like that kind of spelled the end for me there.
But I also think that like Cody Ford was signed with the thought process of that he could be the tweener, he could be a guard, he could be a tackle, he could do both, even though they announced him as what they announced.
Right. So if you're about to add, let's say, a tackle and a guard in this draft, you're probably not getting rid of him if you added them for that reason last year and gave him that run. If it's between him and Deontay Smith, you're probably saying, well, we've done the Hakeem Adeniji dance with Deontay Smith too, right? And like we just finally got to spend some resources on this stuff where I understand they've spent money because they haven't been able to evaluate well in the draft or just haven't had the picks work out for various reasons. But if you're going to go and add a first rounder and a second rounder, you have to put those resources to it, or you can't be seriously trying to solve this offensive line at this point. You've spent a lot of money on it already. Like going out there and overpaying $3, $4, $5 million for okay offensive line play is not going to fix it. Like you can get these stopgap options, but eventually you got to put those resources to it. And this is a fantastic draft for building up the trenches where the Bengals have their biggest needs at like a guard tackle, kind of either one of those or the defensive tackle. And I think they just really have to take advantage of the strength of the draft and just beef up the trenches. They've done wide receiver. They've done corner. They've done safety. They've got quarterback. They've got 2 paid linebackers. I'm looking square at the trenches saying you got to add a lot of beef to that. You got to be like the Falcons with all that weight that they had down there with like Calais Campbell. They weren't even good. They were just huge and impossible to move in the run game sometimes. Like sometimes you just gotta dig deep on it, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I feel sometimes Elise is asking a great question. I apologize as well for cutting you guys off. I didn't mean to cut you off when you guys were giving your thoughts. I get a little carried away sometimes with these topics, but I think that says why hasn't the Lisa asked why hasn't the O-line been solved? I think there's a lot of reasons as to why. I think first and foremost is it's difficult to I think it's difficult for all 32 teams in the National Football League. I think when you look across the board, every team has a flaw on the offensive line. Every team, no matter which way you shape it. I think if there's one position that every team sort of has figured out to some degree, is probably center. Maybe it's probably the majority of the teams in the National Football League have their center position figured out because it's such a pivotal spot. Obviously, because it's communication between the offensive line and the quarterback. That being said, I think it's easy to sort of like, I guess, play these offensive, these off-season games where you log online and you say, sign this player, sign that player. But there's also a realistic portion to it, because when you think about it from a team perspective, teams, every team would like to have great starters all across the offensive line. But the fact of the matter is that's not, it's not realistic. You're going to have, you're not going to get elite play all across the offensive line. I think the team that came the closest to that maybe is the Eagles.
Yeah.
And they still struggled in spots as well, right?
I was going to say, would you say the 49ers or the Browns had a good
Lions.
offensive line, right?
Yeah.
And they were worse than the Bengals in terms of pass block efficiency, which for those who don't know, pass block efficiency measures your pressures per snap to
Mhm.
figure out who's getting to the quarterback most, and it weights sacks even more because that's worth more. And, Cincinnati, to your credit of saying it's not solved necessarily as 20, but there's also better offensive lines out there, I think, in our opinion. Like, the Seahawks played pretty well with the different things that Shane Waldron did with their sidecar formation and everything else, and they still were worse than the Bengals. So it's like, sometimes it's hard to predict, and offensive line coaching can be huge. Just getting the right guys, like hitting on a couple mid-round picks that solve those issues. Because how many guys have, 3 or 4 guys, but then you hit on a Trey Smith
Yep.
or Landon Dickerson, and then suddenly it's like, wow, we got some mid-round guys who just step in right away day one and start. And like that's kind of what's behind a lot of the good offensive lines, right? There's not many that were like, hey, we built and picked these 3 guys in the first round, back to back, or second round, back to back years, and then we signed 2 free agents and it all worked out. Sometimes it's like, hey, we just put this 4th rounder or this free agent or this guy we got from BJ Hill style and said, wow, like this guy's actually playing better than we thought. Like,
Yeah.
here we go. This is great. So I think it's a little bit of luck involved. But as for why it hasn't been working so far, it's just injuries, bad player evaluation. I don't think Jim Turner was a great offensive line coach. I don't think he was teaching great techniques. I think that ruined some things for a while. I don't think they were making good decisions personnel-wise for both like financially and like who they decided to get. They were running out a lot of talent there that just hadn't been in the NFL for a while. And sure, this year hadn't necessarily been a giant step forward in terms of the numbers. They still ranked 20th, I said, in pass block efficiency, but the pieces are definitely there, and a healthy Joe Burrow will help solve that, right? When you saw Joe Burrow healthy and you just take the Jake Browning weeks where they actually ran a competent offense that was designed for him,
Right.
you see a much better picture of the offensive line. So I think it's more accurate to judge it based off of those games than to include Joe Burrow not being able to drop back, like to just have the defense going, he can't move. They can't do a 5-step or 7-step drop back. We're going to blitz everything. We're going to be bearing down on everything. Like,
Right.
that is a tough way to live when you don't have that threat, that mind game of like going deep or making someone pay. That keeps people honest. And when you don't have that, like, that's so hard on the offensive line to really take that blame. Like, sure, they own their share, but it's unfair to just look at them squarely for that.
And real quick, I think when you look at the Bengals' issues this season, obviously you point to Joe Burrow injury, the offensive line was not the number 1 issue. The offensive line was not the number 2 issue. And that should tell you all you need to know about moving forward. You're going to have 4 returning starters, and that is a damn good plus. So when I look at the offensive line, tackle position is an issue. The depth is an issue, but the Bengals are in a good spot with the offensive line.
Right.
Regardless of what the numbers say or where they're ranked, when they were at their peak against the 49ers, looked good. The run game, when they finally started establishing, looked good. So the Bengals offensive line, it is in a much better spot than it was before.
I agree. I think that part of it is you have to also be willing to come out of your comfort zone, right? And I think that's the one caveat when we discuss all this, we're dealing with it in the eyes of what the Bengals MO has been, right? And whether that be, hey, we're not paying a guard top tier free agent money, or whether it means that they believe that they can get adequate play out of that position for a lesser amount. Like there's a lot of reasons to point to as to why the offensive line is going to point out. But I think in dealing in the
someone else had brought up a good
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Draft athletes.
Yeah.
Draft guys who are actually athletic. That's a crazy idea, I know. But yeah, more often than not, the more athletic guys are hitting more than the guys who can't hang, because obviously they don't have quality tools. And that really is a big thing too, where if you keep taking subpar athletes and then not getting good results, maybe you should change something.
Yeah.
maybe you should take some halfway decent athletes, some guys who can actually move.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. You know, it's funny. I saw somebody comment something here. I'm trying to figure out if I can find it. DJ USA, he's cooking today, man, on the show. He's like, I think Jax Power Johnson may be the best lineman in this draft. That guy is an absolute unit. Yes, absolute beast. And would love him to be the center of the future here in Cincinnati, or guard, or whatever that might look like. But absolute dog. I'm just a fan of drafting good players. To me, like, I think
That's what it is, man.
right, man. If a guy is like slipping in the draft, and I don't care if he's, you think about everything from a long term game, man. What was the guy's name from the USC, man? Ravens wind up drafting. I was like flipping out about, huh?
Voorhees, yeah.
Man, Andrew Voorhees, man. They drafted him with the sixth in the 6th round, man. To me, that's just like, that's a no brainer. Like, that's, I wouldn't even let, if that guy was sitting at me in the 5th round or 4th round, I would have had to consider it. I understand you're probably going to go a year without him playing on the football field, but in a league that is dying for and starving for offensive linemen, to me, his pedigree coming out, that guy was looked at as probably a back end first round guy, 2nd round pick guy. When he gets healthy, you mean tell me that guy can't come in and be a starter over Cordell Volson or something like that? To me, you shouldn't be so tied to players. Listen, you should always try to look forward to get better and trying to put the best players out there. Hunter Moore said, I was mad when Trey Smith fell to the 6th. He'd been solid for the Chiefs, 100%. And I think that was
very good.
That was some health issues, right? People
Creed Humphrey, Landon Dickerson, all these guys that people, like you said, to your credit, guys, everyone knew who were good players, who like positional value kind of pushed them down, and like maybe an injury here or there, or, oh, they're maybe a little small. Like, no, those dudes are some mean motherfuckers, man. Like, they are some good football players. Like, don't overthink those situations.
And that's the biggest thing, man. And I think that's why I don't want to get so tied into, hey, in free agency, if there's a guy that a position that we need, we're just going to draft offensive line. I think that's why I'm more so bullish on it, because for me, I'm like, what if a Jared Verse is staring at you at pick 18? No, I think that's very unrealistic.
My opinion is best trench player available.
Yeah,
whether like defensive end is a little less on the back burner of all of those, but like I just think they need so many bodies in the trenches, like for depth, for starters, everything.
But thinking about Jared Verse, if that guy becomes available, how do you not draft him?
Kick Sam Hubbard inside.
I don't care what he likes or not. I mean, your 6 sacks a year says that you're not going to stop us from drafting this guy. I'm sorry if you don't like it, right? Jerzon Newton, if that's a guy that's staring at you, you've been trying to replace DJ Reader for so long. I mean, not DJ Reader, Geno Atkins, trying to get to find that guy that can offer up that Geno Atkins. And every year we say, oh, it's Kalijah Kancey. Oh, it's Milton Williams. Oh, it's this next guy. And then you just don't grab him. Make this the year that you grab that player, that said player. And also, don't be afraid, man. If you're 2 picks away and a guy's still sitting on the board and you're afraid maybe you're not afraid of the 2 teams that are ahead of you, but maybe you're afraid of the team. You should be afraid of the team that might call up and try to jump you. And that's where my mentality would go. Be aggressive, man. If there's a potential in this draft where you can grab a guy that you think could, be a cornerstone on this.
As many picks in the top like 150 as you can. Because some teams are good at identifying and taking these, 6th and 7th round guys. And I'm not trying to sleep on DJ Ivy at all, but the Bengals just traditionally have not been so great at, outside of like wide receiver, kind of making those late round picks work. And especially even coming out of Mobile, like hearing these guys who cover the draft for a living, who've done deep dives on these guys, kind of talking like, hey, really those top 100 picks are really going to be valuable this year. It is a deep draft, but especially in the first 3 rounds, right? Once you start getting around 4+, and the Bengals definitely could just use some of the capital that they have, especially if they end up doing anything for T. Higgins in a tag and trade situation, or they end up getting any other compensation for any other moves that they make. Like that's going to be huge. Like being able to nail those guys and get an extra Jordan Battle or 2, right?
Yeah, and I think like the biggest thing heading into the draft, I'm with you guys. You cannot head into the draft without an offensive tackle, because then you're putting yourself in the position to where you're forced to take an offensive tackle. And I agree. Just to put it simply, I went back and rewatched Miles Murphy's film. In my opinion, Jared Verse's film, Chop Robinson's film, these guys' film is way better than Miles Murphy.
I agree.
And that's not a knock to Miles Murphy. Miles Murphy's on the team. He is going to get a chance to shine, but I watch their film, and their film, they pop out. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you are pigeonholed. I think the only position would be right tackle. and you don't want to pigeonhole yourself to that right tackle position.
I'll say this though, because I don't want to beat up on Miles Murphy.
Yeah.
Like there are people out there that kind of like I see you guys mind in the comment section saying, imagine if we drafted Sam Laporta over Miles Murphy. I can promise you guys, nobody expected Sam Laporta to put up the crazy amount of numbers that he put up, at the this season. Nobody expected that. Michael Mayer was looked at to be tight end 1, Dalton Kincaid, then that switch, Dalton Kincaid, those are guys that were expected to have breakout years. Not saying Sam Laporta wasn't going to be good, but nobody expected him to have one of the greatest rookie seasons from a tight end of all time. Hindsight is 2020. I think trying to remember that Miles Murphy was projected to be a top 15 pick before the season.
Yeah.
He was projected to be a top 15 pick. The entire Clemson defense fell off a cliff because of a new defensive coordinator, and Venables went to Oklahoma. Also, a lot of things went by the wayside, if you will, to make that happen. I still think Miles Murphy is going to be a fine player for the Bengals. I do. And I agree with Daniel's point as well. I do think Chop Robinson's good. Him and I were watching a little bit of their film.
I love Chop
Earlier, man. And, obviously if those guys are staring at you in the face, then you have to have a serious conversation about drafting those guys, of course, but at the same time, I think that when I say, if there's a blue chip prospect out there or a player that you love, maybe you don't even have a position of need for it right away, but that's how great teams stay great. That's how great teams stay on top. The Eagles, they may not have a position, a guy, a need for that guy right now, but they will have a need for that guy. Remember when the Eagles drafted Landon Dickerson? They didn't need him right at that point in time, but they drafted him, knowing that there would become a time in which they would need him. And that's my thought process. There has to be a thought process of life without Trey Hendrickson, life without Sam Hubbard when those time comes. And you don't want to be left standing there like, wow, well, we'll just overpay for a defensive end in free agency at some point in time when you could just draft a guy. So let this be, I guess a thought, right? In a perfect world, I'd love for Jerzon Newton to fall to the Bengals, right? He feels a need. He feels checks all the boxes, but at the same time, you can't go into the draft banking on that.
Yep.
That's my thought.
Yeah, and real quick, just to kind of finish off what you said about the Laporta, Miles Murphy, when you look at it in a nutshell, you would 10 times out of 10 rather take a dominant edge rusher over a dominant tight end. That's my opinion, but that is the hope that they drafted Miles Murphy with. So,
and then you got. I'm just going to respond to you quick, DJ, and I think we're, this is friendly banter back and forth, so I don't want anyone to misconstrue this. He says Murphy is a gray man, doesn't stand out at all. I also want to make you understand though, offensive positions such as tight end, such an easy position to come into the league and have immediate success.
In the Lions offense, that is a low ADOT offense where they're not throwing downfield all the time, where they're doing good scheme to try and get you wide open in space and take advantage of your strengths.
Right.
On top of the fact that we knew, go back to the draft show that you and I and Joe were all talking, and everybody was talking about the pick and talked about how he was going to be a developmental guy. He wasn't going to come in and kick Trey Hendrickson or Sam Hubbard off the field. He was going to slowly be brought along, a guy who had great traits, who needed development, who needed that polish, who didn't get that technique that you would want, because if he had that technique and polish, he would be a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
So like it was baked into why you got a guy with his traits where you did, is the lack of technique refinement. It's like, but all the other things are there. The age is there. The athleticism is there. The measurables in terms of just physical strength, length, size, all those things are there. It's just the technique refinement and the production profile. Like that's really the big concern, which again was why we were like, hey, this guy needs a year before he's going to see any like real impact. And now we're all sitting here going, oh yeah, he's a bust. He's like doing exactly what we said was going to happen.
Right.
Like, and I thought he did well this year on his trajectory.
I agree. And I love what JC Kirk is saying in the comment section. Yeah, I could tell ball, brother. He says, in Marion Hobby, we trust. Marion Hobby is truly one of the best D-line coaches in the National Football League. I have no concerns about the development of of Miles Murphy under him. I have no concerns about that. I am excited to see him take a step forward too. I would just say let's be slow to judge. Let's be slow to judge. Let's see what comes of him. Well, I think he's going to be a fine player for the Bengals. I really, really do. And we never know. There was a point in time where people were looking at I forgot who the pass rusher that came out was.
Daniil Hunter.
And they started off slow. And people were like,
I mean, just an example of one. Like
Yeah.
there's a couple. I mean, Max Crosby is another
Right.
one. Like, I mean, he showed some flashes, but no one thought he was going to be one of the best edge rushers in the NFL.
Right. So, like I said, let's just be slow to judge and then see how this thing shakes out. Let's get to let's answer like 3 questions, Dan, before we head out of here.
Yeah, our guy All in J, he said, Malik, why can't Cincy get different or better scouts in the scouting room for the offensive line if we keep getting it wrong? Real quick, they did a great piece on the Bengals website. We were reading it the other day, and we just kind of read into, what is the scouting room look like? It's only a couple people. They got one of the guys, Christian Sarkisian. He was, he's a mainstay for the past couple of years. They have a very small room. They trust the guys in the room, and that's not going to change. And that's the fact, whether we like it or not, whether, we say you guys aren't drafting right. They've got their 3 to 4 guys in their room that they trust, that they send out to go to 8, 10 different schools and say, hey, I trust you. They have 3 guys. They will go down to Texas. I trust you to cover 8 to 10 schools, report back the info to me, and I trust that. So
Respectfully, that's crazy. But
yeah, it is. I don't know every other team, but I would be very shocked to believe that every other team doesn't have more than 4 guys in that room. And that's what the Bengals have. They have their scouts, report to Tobin, and then obviously Brown. But
yeah, I think you said that beautifully, Daniel. I think they just have a very, very literally when people realize how small their scouting team actually is, it's actually kind of crazy when you think about it. But that's when they rely a lot on the coaches, right, after the season to pitch in and help with things like that. And obviously, they're always involved with the process to some degree. But
and those guys still they still get to all the prospects
Yeah.
because you watch all the film on the prospects. Still, the difference is the resources that you have to go just fly somebody. There's 4 different pro days going on a Tuesday afternoon for prospects that you like, right? And then you have to choose which ones you want to go to, right? Like, or which ones you can send people to, right? And you're going to get all that tape, but like being able to work guys out in person, that kind of stuff, like that's what you're missing out on. You're not like just flat out, God, if only we had time to get to, JC Latham. Gosh, if we only had that. And there's something to be said for having more voices in the room, but there's also something to be said for having too many chefs in the kitchen, right? Especially if you don't have good communication with your team, right? It doesn't matter how many guys you have if you can't get anything together because you're in such gridlock about how to approach things
100%.
in different ways. There's definitely benefits, like pros and cons, both to operating the way that they do. But like I said, it's more about resource allocation than it is like including time being a
100%.
resource. But with so many other resources out there that do a lot of the dirty work for you, like the play-by-play stuff for PFF, like all the stuff that any other kind of analytics or just tracking data, GPS tracking data, you don't have to go back and say, all right, shoot, we want to watch Mims. Okay, so like let's go back and let's just watch 8 games and figure out which one of these are good. You can look at PFF stats and say, hey, they had him like graded lowly in this one. Maybe I should watch that. That's one of his worst games, probably. That was one of his best games. He gave up 0 sacks in that, 60 pass reps. You know what? Okay, there were 40 true dropbacks in this game. I can watch this game and put a lot of stock in this because they didn't run screens all the time, right? Like that's the way it helps you save time. So they probably just use a lot of resources like that to narrow their focus a little bit so they can say, hey, I'm going to watch 3 games of this guy that are going to give me a lot of information as opposed to watching 6. And then use the data we get from the combine, use the workouts to evaluate the rest of it the other way. So there's different ways to go about it. And sure, it's unpopular how small they have. Sure, they could be bigger. But I don't think it's as detrimental as some people paint it out to be.
I agree with you.
We got a question from DJ USA. He said, would you guys rather have an extra draft pick and Chris Jones or T. Higgins? I think obviously this is hypothetical, but and this is assuming
What?
Rather have an extra draft pick and Chris Jones or T. Higgins. I'm assuming they're saying as if this is like a sign and trade.
What kind of draft pick?
Probably like a second.
Or third round pick and Chris Jones.
But
And-
Chris Jones
and
is going to cost probably
20
more.
million?
I was going
20 million?
Oh, Chris
Maybe
Jones is
more?
going to be like 28 or 30. He's
Yeah.
trying to get paid.
I'm good.
That's the only. You think the Chiefs wouldn't bring him back for 20 million? He's looking around at all these guys getting, and Quinnen Williams getting 25 and 26, and saying, "Aren't I the best non-Aaron Donald defensive tackle in the league? Don't I deserve 28 and 30?" So, like, if you're looking at defensive tackles, and personally, just for the long run too, I would prefer Christian Wilkins, Justin Matabuke at $24 million a year, as opposed to Chris Jones, and as he declines into his
Mhm.
elder statesman years. And yeah, I'd rather take the guys on the upswing who are hitting the prime of their career. But if you're asking me, T. Higgins, or you get that second round pick and you get one of those guys, you know, of your whatever choosing, dude, the money you save, like with T. Higgins, like you really can spread it out. And obviously, we're talking about splurging it here, but like $28 million is a lot of money
Yeah.
to play with. You can patch a lot of holes on this team with that. You can get a starting tight end. You can get some defensive tackle insurance. You can get a guard and still have $8 million left over because of that. And
Right.
how much better off is the whole of the team if you get that plus a second round pick to get one of these top 100 guys that these scouts and these guys who are coming out of Mobile, who've looked at these people in person and have studied these guys at length, are saying, these are the super valuable guys. It's a deep draft, but only to this point, right? Like how valuable are those points to where, again, you get the draft pick, you get 3 guys in free agency and have more money to spend. Like we talked about this with the Will Anderson trade, where it's hard for any one player to be more valuable to a team than a group of 3 or 4, right? That's just really, really hard to do. So that weighs into it for me, where I would say, hey, I'll take the assets at this point, because this team is at a point where it needs to replenish in a couple spots.
I'm in agreement with you, Evan. I think that's sort of like
It's a tough truth, man, but it is.
Yeah, for sure. 28 million is a lot. When you put it in that way. But that's all the time we got here for today. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of State of the Jungle with Malik, Wright, presented by First Star Logistics. I want to make sure you guys do us a favor, give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, turn on post notifications so you guys don't miss when we go live or upload content from the First Star Logistics studio. We appreciate you guys for supporting. Next week, we'll be in touch and letting you guys know what player will be spotlighting. Hope that you guys join us back here live next Wednesday, same time, same crew, same place. But until next time, Hoo day.